Hello and welcome to Dialogue. China is taking further steps to tighten oversight of data as the country's first data security law comes into effect on September the 1st. Together with the Cybersecurity Law, which has been in effect since 2017, and the Personal Information Protection Law, which will take effect on November the 1st, the three laws build a comprehensive framework for online data security and privacy protection in China, each with different regulatory focuses. What's in this new law and why is it needed, and how will it affect China's digital economy and internet companies? And will it be able to maintain a balance between extracting value from data while also protecting data security? To help us understand more, I'm joined by David Mahon, Executive Chairman of Mahon China Investment Management, He Jing, attorney of CGTN law firm, and Professor John Gong from University of International Business and Economics. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. So welcome to the show, gentlemen. He Jing, I will start with you. China's data security law comes into effect 3rd September the 1st. We know, since 2017, there is a cybersecurity law. So tell us, what's the relationship between the two laws, and what are the highlights of this latest, the new law?
So this actually, the data security law and the cybersecurity law are the two fundamental pillars of the entire data-related security, like a legal framework. And you also mentioned that the Personal Information Protection Law, which is going to be effective in a couple months. So all the three pillars are very, very critical. Now, if we just looking at the cybersecurity law and the data security law, now they all call security, but it's really coming from different perspectives. If we just looking at the data as something like we're focusing on, it's like a subject matter. For the cybersecurity law, it's really more about how the government is going to regulate the network service providers, like internet platforms, how this internet platform should deal with the data security issues. But the data security law is more from the government perspective, how the government's going to really handle the data security issues. Now, if you're looking at the data security law, there's a fundamental policy. Fundamental policy is really about the data sovereignty. That's actually the government stepping in to say, hey, data is part of sovereignty issues. So we have this fundamental law to deal with this. Cybersecurity law is more about how the network online platform should protect the security. And for the cybersecurity law, it's more about both set of the laws deal with both personal information and also non-personal information. But a personal information protection law, that's really more about the privacy or personal information.
Mm-hmm. David Mahon, you are doing business in China and you are the business owner. I mean, you are in this sector. I'm not sure you are exactly or related to those, security issue. But anyway, I'm sure you are following this closely, whether that will affect your business or, business just like yours, your presence in China. So what are the points you are following, you are concerned with?
It more relates to our clients' businesses. One is a stockbroking company based out of London, making investments into businesses in the sector. The other is a New Zealand company, a fitness business, Les Mills, based in Shanghai. And they're looking to interpret what the ramifications of these laws are. There is complexity and they'll need advice to get it right. But I think the principles are quite straightforward. I mean, it's about personal data and personal sovereignty, I suppose, which then does transfer to national sovereignty. And China is actually ahead of most other countries in addressing the legal, political, and also commercial issues related to this. So in the end, it will provide more security, and it'll mean that the asset that data constitutes in a company will be more secure. So it's a bit bumpy at this stage, and there's some spinning of what it might be in some quarters in terms of criticizing China. But I think it's fundamentally, legally and politically very sound.
Mm-hmm. John, you are a professor of economics. If you look at this lawmaking from that perspective, Obviously, some of them is really about sovereignty, national security. Others is about like privacy, simply, or the security of data. We know a few years ago, basically the government, used to give a free run of the Chinese companies in terms of the use of big data, collecting of the data, how to use it, the storage of the data. So you do see a fast development of this, big data businesses sector, and also this artificial intelligence. Is it the point now we are doing this because somehow that sector of the economy is maturing to the point you need some regulation now?
Well, you're absolutely right. I think we can describe this as the formation of a perfect storm. All developments along many fronts are concentrating, coalescing on this issue from several perspectives. Actually, first, I think it's very clear this data security law concerns a national security issue, as Attorney He has said. It concerns a sovereignty issue. What I'm thinking about is that data has become so essential these days. It is becoming part of essentially I would call it digital national infrastructure. What these big platform companies are building are essentially national infrastructures, and data is a very big piece of that. So it is becoming a part of a national infrastructure in a digital sense. So naturally, it raises the issue of national security. So I think that's not surprising to me. It's been going on for some time. The second issue is respect to consumer protection. I think for a long time, the internet has been pretty much developing on its own. It's like the Wild West. Companies can do whatever they want, and to a large extent, the government has been taking a very accommodating and lenient attitude towards this development. But now we have come to the stage that this data collection effort on part of these companies is becoming so aggressive and so intrusive that it really raises the issue of consumer protection. In other words, they can know, and if they want to know, everything about people's life. We are using the phone so much these days that practically everybody's daily life can be traced down to every minute, every second, every location. We know this already during the content tracing exercise that we've been gone through during the pandemic prevention measures. It's part of the pandemic prevention measures. So we know its capability. And I think if we let this industry develop on its own, it will be too dangerous. It will be dangerous to consumer protection. It will be dangerous to national security as well. So I think, finally we've come to the stage that the state needs to do something. It needs to step in and regulate these industries. And I think legislation itself is the ultimate form of regulation. There's a legal foundation upon which the government can take actions. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a very good development.
Yeah, He Jing, as John mentioned about the protection of consumer rights here, we probably live in China. We do see this kind of like abuse of collecting the data. Like your personal information, your ID number, your phone number, your home address could be abused. It could be simply, you don't know, what make it available online. And of course, with this COVID-19, because of the lockdown, people rely more on the online communication, online education, etc. A lot of information, personal information. Is that the background why the government is tightening basically the regulation on the protection of personal information?
That's definitely true. It's actually not just China, right? It's the protection of personal information, protection of privacy. It's a trend. It's not just more than a trend. I think more than 100 countries and regions have adopted some sort of a data security law, the privacy law. So it is the trend in the whole world. Now, there's actually a fine distinction between data security and data privacy. It's not entirely the same, right? There's more, the different parts of the different sides of the one fundamental rights. So for the privacy, it's really about the privacy from something. It's about, it's not really about the choice of the personal interest. What are the choices for a person to taking care of their identity-related information? But for security, it's really about how the data should be kept in a secure place. So it's a different sides. I think right now for the data security law, is really focusing on how to keep those data secure. I was thinking about it nowadays. A lot of companies, different organizations, even including government organizations, they are collected. They are managed a huge giant sum of the personal data. It's very important to keep those information safe, secure. And but for the day-to-day operation and how the consumers have the right choice to deal with their own data, that's really more about the domain of the data privacy law. So there's a fine distinction, but definitely I think you are definitely right. It is the trend. It's a fundamental the context of increasing or a much stronger protection of the personal information.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you said, Hejing, if you compare the Chinese personal information protection law earlier, like the EU, they have this general data protection regulation, as known as the GDPR. That's very strict, but some observers say the strictness of China's legislation in the area of privacy and data safety is leading the world in terms of both national sovereignty and individual protection. They gave the example, for example, like in the Chinese law, the maximum penalty for serious violation in the people's information protection for serious violation is 5% of the annual revenue of the company.
Yes.
More than the 4% of the fine companies face under GDPR. So explain to us, why is China being so strict? Is more strict than the EU actually in terms of protecting those data?
I think the scale. Because think about China. I think China is leading in lots of ways when it comes to the internet industry. Right? Looking at the way we're developing all this online payments, everything related to internet technologies, and then think about the size of our population, size of our netizens, the number of people who are using the online services. I think the scale here is probably even bigger than those in Europe. I think that's why our governments recognize there's increased the demands for better protection.
Mm-hmm. Well, John, of course, when you come to this, tightening regulation, the oversight of this market, people's natural concern, in particular, people from the business community would be, what's the impact on our business? Probably, in China's case, is really about the digital economy. So in your understanding, what do you see as impactful in terms of the digital sector?
Well, obviously, it's going to impose a cost on those businesses, but it's going to increase their cost of doing business. They're going to be complying with the new regulations, so that means that there will be compliance costs. But that's okay. I think the cost of doing business is the cost of national security, cost of democracy, the cost of the law and order. These are the things that any civil society have to live up with. So these are the things that just basically part of doing business. And I think any legitimate business needs to incorporate that cost. And I also want to mention that these companies are hugely profitable. When you look at these big high-tech companies, big tech companies in China. I mean, look at the income statements, for example, Alibaba, for Tencent. I mean, they're very, very profitable companies. So the additional cost of complying with this data requirements is nothing. It's peanuts to them. I also want to add a note on the previous question you asked Attorney He about the maximum penalty, as a percentage, the fines, as a percentage of the company's revenue. I think this is the maximum percentage as stipulated by the law. And I think this shouldn't be taken too much out of context because after all, just the maximum. Actually, I did some empirical study myself. Actually, I published a paper regarding the fining method. In other words, how regulatory authorities in China fine companies, the fining behavior. In the antitrust context. It's a little bit related, but not quite the same. And what I find is that China's regulatory authorities, competition authorities, on average, find these companies who are violators of certain antitrust clauses, anti-monopoly law, usually get a little bit over 1% of their annual revenue. So even the law says it's much more high percentage at the maximum, but in reality, what they really got hit is something just a little bit over I think it's like 1.5% or something. I can't remember exactly, but it's way less than what the law actually allows for. So I think it's not really a big deal. It's something quite normal, and as I said, it's a normal cost of doing business, and I think these companies should just comply with it. And if anything, we should just shut up, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Right, He Jing, I know you are going to respond to that. But again, what's your advice, to those companies? Probably they are in this sector. They will be affected one way or the other. What do they need to do in terms of, being in compliance with the regulation, with the law?
Strict compliance, actually. We are in the world of compliance at this moment. Let me respond to Professor Gong's comments about antitrust, the enforcement. I agree in the past, the fine probably will stay relatively on the lower range side. But actually, in today's world, if some violation happen in the same level that as in the past, probably the level of the fine will be much higher than what happened in the past. So the policy is now quite different. I think in today's world, I think authorities more on probably more on a higher level to ensure the compliance. So that's a give really higher demand, higher obligation imposed on especially the organizations or companies who are managing the huge amount of data, especially critical data. For this data security law, there's the new concepts such as important data, quote unquote, and also quote unquote critical data. Critical data is really more fundamental to the national interest, the national security. Important data are really those important to a certain critical industry. So especially for any service provider who are in this area, they really have to do whatever they can to the extent that the current state of our technology allowable, fulfill their obligation. It's not going to be easy. We're not saying this is going to be easy, but it is a part of the reality, at least now and the near future.
Mm-hmm. Well, David, obviously now we live in, we have to live with this new reality, some challenges, some extra costs in order to be in compliance with the law. Do you think the business community is okay with that, and they are looking at how to deal with the new reality, and in what way probably to be effective in terms of a stricter compliance?
What we're telling our clients is that the greatest threat to the Chinese economy is monopolies, cartels in certain sectors. So this is a part of dealing with that problem in China, which certainly was emphasized in the actions against Ant, Alibaba, and Didi. And if you look around the world, the thing that is wrong with the market economies of so many Western countries is that antitrust laws are not applied, and there is huge dominance of single businesses in a number of sectors, which destroys competition, it dissuades, or it is a disincentive to innovation. So at least this has a potential of opening up that side of the Chinese market. So small and medium-sized businesses have more opportunities. So I think foreign firms should look at it that way. The only firms that should be really concerned about this are those that are already dominant in a sector and are going to be curtailed by the new laws. But also, there are true issues of sovereignty. There are so many things that are being developed in China in partnership with foreign companies related to the digital infrastructure, for instance. That needs to be something which is governed. It can't just then be dragged offshore. Having been developed here, there has to be some process of vetting how this is then shared with parent companies or moved to other countries. So there are a number of issues of personal and national security that I think are quite simple. So most companies are just trying to work out what this means in detail. And the interesting thing is that China tends to promulgate these regulations and laws. They then put them into the market, and they're quite flexible in adjusting them. So if 4 or 5 months there are anomalies or problems, they will adjust those and they will add or they will subtract things. So I think we should look upon this as being a period of some flexibility and not just an ultimatum.
You're talking about this enforcement of the law. Usually it takes some time for people to be familiar with the law in the first place and then learn how to be in compliance with the law. And David, there's an interesting development, at least people look at it from another point of view, another perspective in a very optimistic way. They say, look, because of the need to follow the law, and then some companies, they themselves are not able to handle that. They have to buy service from the private sector. And then there's probably a new emerging industry about data security. You need professionals. You need lawyers like He Jing. You need new companies to provide the service for your company to make sure everything is all right, is not against the law. How do you look at that?
I think that has tremendous opportunities, of course, and businesses will emerge, people get employed, and that service sector of China that is now such a huge part of the economy will expand further. But also, it means that companies can look at a set of regulations, they can look at the things that they are obliged to be compliant with, and at least they know what it is they can and cannot do. One of the problems we're facing for some of our present clients involved in cross-border e-commerce or those that are here managing data, that they don't quite know what the current regulations require. So yes, it provides businesses opportunity to provide services, but also in the process of that, it will clarify where obligations lie. I think that is something which is positive in terms of operating here.
Well, John, obviously, if you look at the investigations into some of the Chinese giants, including DD Tuxing, for example, obviously that is affecting their performance on the stock market. So there's a concern, whether somehow these, these really tight regulations, laws, somehow will affect the Chinese competitiveness, the Chinese companies' global competitiveness. What do you, think about that?
Well, I think the issue of compliance cost, the issue of competitiveness, global competitiveness, talking about global competitiveness, there's no comparison of these issues with respect to national security. When it comes to national security, there's no room for negotiation. There's no room for bargaining. There's no room for haggling. You just do it. Because this is a matter that concerns most to the state, and if there's no national security, there'll be no competitiveness at all. So I'm firmly on the side of the government on this debate that there shouldn't be even any debate about what constitutes the right measures or policies. You just do what the government tells you to do, because these measures, these policies are coming from the national security apparatus organizations in China, and they are coming from their own perspective. They're coming from their own reasons, and there's no reason to argue with these people, right? Argue with this organization. So from my perspective, I think this debate shouldn't even take place in the first place. When it comes to national security, everything goes to the backseat. Let's be very clear on this point. And I think this is of utmost importance for any business, in domestic business, indigenous business, foreign businesses, joint business. Doing business in China is an issue of national security when it comes to data. And we just have to comply with the law and also regulations, relevant regulations put out by the government.
Mm-hmm. Well, He Jing, obviously John, makes a good point. But also, if you look at the reality, for example, if you are a Chinese company or American company or company from Australia, New Zealand, if you are doing business in the European Union, for example, you have to follow their new regulation, very strict law about the privacy, about data security. So being, compliance. Following the compliance to the law is not necessarily, it's really something you have to do, right?
Yes. Correct. I think any firms, right? The firms in the business of dealing with data, the firms of doing any sort of data processing has to deal with the global regulatory framework. That's the job of the governments. The firm have to learn how to adapt to it. Now, but with China, there's one thing very distinct. If you're looking at this data security law, Yes, data sovereignty is definitely the policy concern, fundamental one, but it's really going beyond the national security. If you look at the law, they keep talking about the security and the development. I was personally surprised by that both words, phrase appear at the same time. It looks like our legislature and our policymakers are really aware of the long-term, the policy. The other very important, the fundamental policy goal is the development. Data business is very, very crucial. I think our government is really realizing that data sovereignty does not just mean that we gotta lock up every important data. It's gotta be, make the data useful. Of course, it's a big job, right? This is beyond this law's the own job to say, in what way we can make this data useful. We all know that the data is not that useful until we find a way to access it or find a way to analyze it. That's really critical. So if you look at the data security law, it does it's actually gives a big job to the government to find a way for people to monetize the data. Right now the law legitimizes the role of data brokerage firms. It's categorized the data into different ways. It's like rating a movie, right? Some of the data probably going to be released for the public processing. I'm actually really predicting maybe before very long the governments will find a way to develop the data infrastructure, like the similar way our government putting huge investments in highways, in high-speed railway, and the governments have to probably got to find a way to say make public of certain amount of the very important data, which probably only government have access to. Then when they make this data available for the firms, big or small, medium firms, to those those firms who have the cutting edge algorithm, who have really best legal business minds or technology minds, learn how to make this data useful. I think that's probably the much bigger job for governments. It's a completely different game. It's not what has to be done by this data security law, but I think the data security law is embedded with some policy goals.
Mm-hmm. David, obviously that's a good point. If you try to understand the government's view, obviously they want development. That's for any government. You want your economy to continue to grow rapidly, in particular the digital sector. On the other hand, of course, there are some regulations, there are some new laws you need to follow because it's for the sake of security of the data of the nation, of the people, of the public. And it's really, but for the company, probably on one hand, you want to follow the law, the new law. On the other hand, you want to take a look at, how can I access those data I need and make a good use of the availability.
Well, that's right. I think for companies, it's quite interesting because it's a good point that a proper digital infrastructure can provide greater transparency. It cuts both ways. These laws protect the individual. They should protect companies from antitrust forces within any economy, but also it makes available more information so the public's better informed and also companies can access key information for their sectors. So all this has very positive ramifications. And one of the things that is leveled against China is that there's too much surveillance, too many things are obscured, but the worst thing has been that governance in China has been weak. Well, this is an act of strengthening governance. And I think down the road, it's a good forecast that there will be greater transparency because of the sophistication of the infrastructure. So it's not a very complex concern to also think, how will companies based in China then compete globally? I think the thing we have to consider first is, how do we make the best market in China, the best governed market in China with the strongest principles for this economy, for us? Once that's established, we can then deal with the issues of global competition.
Right.
But you can't compromise.
Well, that's
privacy.
All we have for today. Many thanks to David, Hejing, and John. And thank you for watching. See you next time.